In this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about improvising on the Grateful Dead song Althea. The section we're improvising on in this song, I think of it as being divided into two separate phrases. The first phrase goes B minor, A, E, back to A, and then the second half is B minor, A, E, and it just stays on the E. You can think of this chord progression as either being B Dorian or E Mixolydian. And the fact is that B Dorian and E Mixolydian are really the exact same thing. The only difference would be which chord you consider to be home. So if you consider this first chord, B minor, to be your home, then I guess you could consider the progression B Dorian. And if you consider the E, where the progression ends, to be the home chord, then the progression would be E Mixolydian. But the really important thing to know is that both of those two modes are made up of the exact same 7 notes. So in addition to the overarching mode of, let's just call it B Dorian, you also have the individual chords as they go by within the progression, and you can sort of follow the chords a little bit, keeping in mind that all of the notes in all of the chords are already there in the mode. But if you know where the chord tones are of the given moment, you can kind of target them in your melodies and extract some really good ideas out of it. A song like this where you're following a few different chords is a good candidate for the caged system. And so how I like to do that is to sort of break the neck of the guitar down into, say, 3 or 4 different zones, all based on caged system shapes. And yeah, the caged system does give you technically 5 zones, one based on each of those shapes, C, A, G, E, D. But the fact is you don't really need every one of those to really cover the full range of the guitar. You just need to have, I would say, 3 at the most, to be honest, under your belt to really cover the full range of the entire neck of the guitar. So to show you real quick how I might think about this type of thing, I would start, say, for example, in the second position where I've got a B minor that looks like that, right? It's like an A minor shape bar chord. And in that same spot, I've got an A chord, which I think of as being based on the caged G shape, which you can kind of picture here also on the 2nd fret. And then the E chord comes up, and you can think of that as the caged D shape here on the 2nd fret. Or you could even think about the open E chord down here in open position. Then, after working in that area of the neck for a while, I might move up to the 5th position. Now I have a B minor chord here that you may or may not be familiar with. It's actually a B minor 7. Doesn't really matter though, because I'm really just using this chord as sort of a guidepost on the neck of the guitar. So that chord, I start with my middle finger on the 6th string, 7th fret. That's the B. And then my ring finger covers the 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and 1st strings all on that same fret. And your index finger can go over here on the 5th string, 5th fret. That's a B minor 7 chord. And then right in that same spot, I've got an A, just based on this caged E shape, standard E shape bar chord. And then it finally resolves to the E, and I do a caged C shape here in the 4th position to get that chord. My real go-to position for this song in particular, in fact, I find myself going to this position quite a bit. It's based on the Phrygian fingering off of the C sharp. So C sharp Phrygian is going to give you the same notes as B Dorian, so I think of the Phrygian fingering. That's how it's all referred to on my website. Here in the 9th position. Within that, the B minor is kind of the shape of a D minor chord if you imagined a bar on the 9th fret, and then a D minor shape chord above that, 10th fret, 12th fret, 11th fret. And then the A chord is here in the 9th position, caged C shape, and the E chord is also in the 9th position with the caged G shape. So all of those chords are contained really cleanly right here within this Phrygian fingering in the 9th fret. So I really treat that one as kind of my go-to position, and it really covers a lot. And then maybe to go big at the end, I'll go up and do the octave of what I was doing down here in the 2nd position. So you can picture a B minor chord here on the 14th fret as your starting position. And really, Just by doing that, I really just broke the neck down into 3 zones, but I basically covered almost the entire range of the guitar by doing that. A quick little trick when you're improvising over a bunch of different chords like this is to, instead of thinking about big 6-string, chords that use all 6 strings, just break the neck down into little clusters of notes on, say, 3 strings. So, to go back to the 9th position that I was just talking about, you'd have this little D minor shape to get the B minor chord. That would be the 10th fret, 1st string, 12th fret, 2nd string, 11th fret, 3rd string. Just those 3 notes. And then the A chord, you have this little D shape right here on the 9th fret. That top note on the high E on the 12th fret also works as part of that same shape. And then your E chord would be 9th fret, 9th fret, 12th fret, the top of the caged G shape. So if you can break it down into a little cluster like that, instead of thinking about all 6 strings, now you're really thinking just in terms of 3, and it's way easier to get your head around it and kind of put those ideas to actual use in your actual soloing. So I should make it clear that every note you play doesn't have to belong to the chord that you're playing it over, but the notes of the chord, what you call chord tones, are what you want to sort of target in your melody, so they're sort of your landing points within the melodies that you play. It's also useful to think in terms of where these phrases start and end. You don't have to follow all the chords, so you could say, just for example, you could strongly target the B minor at the beginning. You could then kind of play just sort of scale stuff as opposed to targeting the actual chords. You just kind of play melodies within the scale over the next few chords, but then build it up to where the chord progression starts over again at the B minor, using that B minor as a target again. Or, for example, you could play something a little more scale-based over the B minor and A chords, but then when it comes to the E chord at the end of the progression, then you target that E very strongly. So it's just sort of different ways that you can build your phrases. So a good way to approach your entire overall solo when you're doing this might be to think about it this way. And, typically the solos in the song are a little shorter. It's not really exactly as open-ended as some Grateful Dead songs tend to be. So, I tend, certainly, there's 5 verses and there's a solo after every one. So, for most of the solos, I keep it pretty short, say 4 times through the phrase. The phrase, remember, is 2 parts, but I play through both of those parts 4 times total. So I'd start off strong on the B minor on the first time around. In between, in the middle, I can kind of worry a little bit less about targeting chord tones and be more scale-based and kind of build up to a peak somewhere up high here. And then when that 4th time comes around, I try to resolve real strong back to that E chord. One last thing I'll point out is that if you're in the mode of whether you call it B Dorian, E Mixolydian, C sharp Phrygian, whatever you decide to call it or however you decide to think about it, whatever note you land on, you're probably not going to be more than 1 step either direction from a chord tone. So if you land on a note and it doesn't quite sound right, try just going on to the next note of the progression, or the next note of the scale rather, and chances are that'll be the right note that you're looking for. As you get better at doing this, the hope, of course, is that you learn to do this more instinctively and you can get around the neck a little more freely, following the chords, but without having to think about it too much. So having said all that, I'm going to go ahead and try and improvise a solo. I'm going to try to do what I just talked about, starting strong on the B minor at the beginning, ending strong on the E at the end. We'll see how this goes.